things to different people, but if you're a musician, a career in rock and roll takes more than a dream. It takes talent, hard work, and a little bit of luck. My guest today has lived that dream as a member of the Grassroots, Badfinger, among others, applying his wares all over the world. Today he's going to share some of his adventures with us. Reed Kailing, thanks for having us.
You betcha.
So excited to be here. Now let's roughly go in a chronological order here. Thousands of kids pick up a guitar every year thinking, I'm going to do this thing. What was different in your case?
It all started out like, I remember in Waterford, Wisconsin, 1956. Jimmy Scarry was walking down the street, and he said he heard about Hound Dog. And I said, well, is that Elvis Presley? And I went, well, who's that? You know, living in a little town, Waterford, you know. But years later, I discovered Ozzie and Harriet and Rick Nelson.
Oh, yeah.
And the rockabilly he did, you know, I Believe in What You Say. You know,
Hello, Mary Lou.
Mary Lou. We did a Rick Nelson show in my basement. It was an air band thing. And then it got more serious as I got towards high school. And we did a takeoff of the Beatles. And they had, the Ed Sullivan show. It's like Billy Joel said, I know now what I want to do in life.
And fate intervened in your career many times.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first occasions that I read about was in the 60s when the band you were in was invited to play at was it the engagement party of the president's daughter?
Linda Baines Johnson.
Yeah,
yep.
the daughter of LBJ?
Yeah, and I sang And I Love Her. And then afterwards,
This was her engagement party.
Correct.
Where was this?
Chuck Robb didn't show, yeah, he was there. No, LBJ was supposed to show up and he couldn't make it. It was at the Milwaukee Athletic Club. Okay. And it was an experience because you learned, well, back now, Secret Service today is a whole new animal, but back then it was pretty intense.
Oh, I'll bet.
They checked you out, but yeah, and then when I remember afterwards, and she was a very sweet lady. She was very kind and everything, and I walked up after we had completed our set. Then it was more, you know, down to the table hopping, you know, and stuff like that. I walked up to her, and as I walked, I approached her like you, almost 2 arms grabbing me.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah.
That's not protocol, buddy.
And she goes, oh, he's cool. You know, leave him alone. And so they, and they get that real somber look, you know.
Nice.
They weren't wearing their sunglasses, but it was, yeah. But that was one thing. Then we won the statewide Battle of the Bands. Okay. And out of 500 bands, and so then we did a TV show out of Chicago. The group was, by the way, called the Destinations.
The Destinations.
And what had happened was we were doing a show down in Chicago on weekends, on Saturdays, called Art Roberts Swing Majority. Now, Art Robert was the program director at WLS.
WLS Radio, the big beacon of rock and roll.
50,000 watts,
yes,
all day long and at night, and more so. And everybody, and it was at this little, top of the board trade building, and it was Hispanic station, WCIU, I want to say. Okay. Tiny, twice, 3 times the size of this room. Everybody did that show because Art was program director, and I saw Michael Jackson on there before they were the Jackson 5. It was the brothers, but they were in little shark skin suits, and he was amazing. And I met the Grassroots on that show. And then later on, I was seen by Filmation, which was an animated show, animated company rather, you know, like a small-time Disney. Hanna-Barbera. Okay. And they actually got them started, and they had a thing called the Hardy Boys that they were starting up. So I ended up being seen on that show, I ended up being Frank Hardy.
Okay, and let's explain the Hardy Boys thing. It was a Saturday morning adventure, mixing animation with a live action band, which you were a member.
We were on live in the beginning, and then we had a song in the middle. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at a piece on the wall, which a friend of mine, I call him Johnny D. He's been a friend of mine since he was 8 years old, but he was a Hardy Boys fan. He gave me that slide, which is what they used for the dance segments in the middle of the show when we did the music. We did 2 albums. We did all the music for the show, and it was a 2-year thing. Got me out of Milwaukee. And that was what you're talking about.
Right. And while this was a bubblegum project, the fact that you played live and it was an integrated band and that you had a black member of the band led to some interesting situations on the road in 1969.
We had a couple of real interesting. I've been threatened before. You know, when you're a kid, you know, bullies. This was crazy because we decided to drive to Birmingham, Alabama, and we went by through, I remember we stopped in Nashville.
Okay.
And we were walking up to a restaurant, and all of a sudden this guy, about 6'5", just big guy, comes up, takes a broom handle, slides into the door handles, you get that out of my face.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, and I worked with Mahalia Jackson, gospel singer, in my career, and I never imagined that world, but
Right.
it happened on 2 occasions on that road trip, and I'll tell you, I was never so happy to get to Birmingham. Then we were put on the 5th floor of the Tutwiler Hotel. It doesn't exist there anymore. Down in the lounge, Steppen Fetchit, who is an old comedian,
Oh yeah.
And they put us on the 5th floor because that's where coloreds and musicians stayed.
Now, fast forward a little bit. You're living in Los Angeles when you're reacquainted with the Grassroots. Is that what?
What had happened was I met Warren and Rob on that TV show, Swing Majority. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you were aware of this, but on that the second show was a Saturday show. They were flying back on Sunday, the next day. They were doing a show that night, Saturday. There was a group on, and Grill disagrees with me, but I have better memory than Rob. There was a group called the Evergreen Blues Band, and it was a 10-piece band. It was a Hispanic band. They had, I'll never get this, mint tuxedos with the fluffy shirts.
Uh-huh.
And Warren and I are standing right off stage, which was actually the dressing area and everything else. And also, Warren and I were talking. We got along very well. And I said, hold it, quiet. I want to listen to this. Listen and going. That was the last group in the show. Oh no, the Grassroots closed it. Warren goes up to the guy after the show, the Hispanic singer, big guy. He says, man, I like that song. Do you have an extra copy of that? And the guy goes, oh, yeah, man, yeah. It's a local, we got it out on a local level. It was Midnight Confessions.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Now, Rob says it came from, I was right there.
Okay.
It was an Evergreen Blues Band, and I forget the name of the label, but they went back, literally copied the arrangement, everything.
Midnight Confessions, which went on to become a huge hit for the Grassroots.
Although it was number 2, it never got to number 1.
Really? Okay.
Grassroots was an interesting band, but yeah, I left Chicago because I left the Hardy Boys thing, went to LA, and ironically enough moved across the street from Warren and up in the Hollywood Hills.
Okay.
And we just became good friends, and the next thing I know, I'm lead guitar player for the Grassroots.
That's awesome.
So it's like...
Love is what you make it. You can't make or break it. No, so don't you run it out. I said love is what you make it. If you make it with me, we'll make it all right. Hey, hey, hey.
People say, well, it's all about luck. No, it's perseverance, but you just gotta know when to grab it.
That's well, you got to keep working to put yourself in opportunities' way. Now the Grassroots, you played on their last 2, what I consider the last 2 real Grassroots albums.
Oh, yeah.
In that Rob Grill and Warren Entner were still involved with the band. There were some later incarnations that were mostly Rob Grill's solo projects.
My Masita,
or
whatever it was called.
So now the rap on the Grassroots, while a hugely successful band, people would say, oh, they're a studio band. They're the producer's darling. How much involvement did you have?
Well, there
in
was
the
a
studio?
reason for that, because the Grassroots were, at least when I joined the band, and Dennis Provisor's band, if you've interviewed him, had just left to do a solo thing, which I don't know what happened to that, but the band was very active. They were sucking. They had years of hits.
Yeah.
So now they were cashing in on the road. We did college tours. Forever. So there was a purpose for that, because Jay Lasker was president of ABC Dunhill. Where's my product? He had the big cigar in his mouth. And he had one eye one that way. Where's my product? He'd be howling over the desk and pounding on the where's my? So Steve Barry had a hit factory, and so what they did, they got Joe Osborne. Hal Blaine, drummer.
The Wrecking Crew.
Oh God, these guys were when they would come in. These guys come in and if they did two takes, it was because somebody sneezed.
Okay.
but we were on the road. But we'd come home, I would overdub guitars. Dennis played keyboard.
Right.
So it was, but it was mostly the Grassroots. If you really want to know about it, they were more of a. It was the vocalization.
And what were you guys like as a live entity? I mean, a lot of the Grassroots sound was slick, and as we talked about, produced. Yeah. I've read where you alluded to the fact that they weren't all that tight; they were kind of loose.
It was like the Grassroots were like, depending on what kind of day you were having, but we were consistent. But sometimes what I call tour crud would set in, and you want to get home, and so, but you go on and you give it your all, you give it your best, but sometimes the best just ain't good enough.
Right.
And so you would have some good shows and some bad shows. But all in all, it was the Grassroots had what I liked, and Grill was really good at this. Joel Larson, the drummer, was good. They had personalities. Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah.
And so when we go play a place, it was like, okay, we're going to have fun tonight. I'll tell you it's about comedians, though. We did 2 shows with George Carlin.
Oh, nice.
Now, that guy, he'd walk on his lips. That guy was wired.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty powerful dude. And we did these college tours. We ended up doing 2 shows, and we were supposed to do 4 total. And we called up Jerry Heller, our agent, and said, get him off the tour. This guy would go out on stage for an hour and 15, 20, burn out our audience.
Oh, yeah.
Burn them. Yeah. We'd get on stage. Here's my imitation of our audience. He just took the life out of them.
No, you don't want to follow George Carlin.
No.
That's insane.
And what he would do in the locker rooms, though, we never knew where he was because, you know how lockers are in rows? All of a sudden he hears where I was talking, and then all of a sudden and then all of a sudden way there, and then it'd be dead quiet. Then it was quiet, and we'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden we go, what is this guy doing, And then it was the longest hour and 15 minutes waiting for him to get off.
Wrap it up.
So to answer your question, yeah, we had good nights. And also, they didn't like the Grassroots. I love the guys in the band, but they didn't like to rehearse.
Right.
We would add our latest hit to the list, go down to Studio Instrument Rentals for an afternoon, play the set twice, and go home.
Okay. That was it.
That was it.
We're ready to go.
Let's knock them dead. But we had a very loyal audience, actually.
Okay, now explain to me the player connection with the band player and their hit "Baby Come Back." Mm-hmm. Now
we're going to do 5 minutes on this.
Okay, that's fine.
Because you talk about the flying finger of fate. What had happened was I left the Grassroots. I build radio control airplanes. I've given it up now because they're too big. They're 8-foot wingspan. I just gave. And I said, Anyway, I took a year. I got off the road. Warren and I left the band at the same time.
Okay.
It was at a Disneyland gig we did, and I was driving home with him. We were going back, and I said, I don't know about you, but I think I've had it. And it was like there was a lot of stuff going on. And Warren says, yeah, and he was going to buy into a company called GTO. Forget what it stood for, but anyway. And I love Warren to this day. We talk constantly, Warren, and at one time we were working together. We produced some things in the studio together, and he's just a great guy, great human being. I really like him. As it turns out, I took this year off, built a radio. I still have the plane. It's a Piper J3, and I built that. And all of a sudden, I get a phone call from Warren one day, and what had happened was he said. And I was living off Doheny, and right over here on Beverly Boulevard was where GTO was located. And there was a gentleman by the name of David Joseph who ran the company. He was English. They had a mother company in England, and they started this one. So anyway, they had a group called Sky Band. And it was Peter Beckett, who was the lead singer on Baby Come Back, and Stephen Kittner. And at the time, they were friends, and they had a third guy, his name was Lane Caudell, who ended up leaving. Call me up. They want me to get involved with the band to replace that third guy. And as it turns out, I'm at the meeting, and I heard what they had to say. The band was really in debt. They incurred a lot of debt with RCA. So here I'm joining a band that's already
behind, under the 8 ball.
And Warren brought me into the fold. Yeah. And I said, Warren, thanks for the invite, but I'm really not interested. But thanks for thinking of me, guys. Dave, pleasure meeting you. I get up and I walk on. these two guys, Beckett and Kipner, follow close pursuit by the time I get to the elevator. We get together. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't understand the business angle about all this stuff. We get together. We wrote some songs. I'm going to speed this up for you a little bit. Wrote some songs together. I brought now all the people that I gathered while in the Grassroots. Now I have Lambert and Potter, who wrote hits for the Grassroots.
Among others.
Correct.
Yeah.
Rhinestone Cowboy. They never had a live band. They never worked in that. They formed Haven Records. We put a band together with Kipner, Kailing, and Beckett. We rehearsed at the Whiskey A Go-Go. We went around and auditioned for people as a trio. And we were doing really well together. Well, and Peter and Steve Kipner didn't get along really. There was a lot of agitation. And Kipner leaves. We bring a guy in, J.C. Crowley. Now the song Baby Come Back came about. My first wife, Patty, whose picture's up on the wall there, and I separated. And Peter was dating her sister, Jessica. Well, anyway, they separated. Henceforth, he started singing Baby Come Back. And that's where the song got its genesis.
Okay.
And I remember the night he was doing it because we were both together in my house. I had an apartment in Beverly Hills, just off Doheny. And he'd never driven a car before. Well, he drank a bottle of almond wine. Listen to this.
That's a good time to start driving.
Could you turn the cameras off? Drank a bottle of almond wine. It was big. And then I said, "You never learned to drive a car, did you?" So we're driving down Santa Monica with my car was called the Bruised Banana. It was a yellow, I wish I had it today, 70 Buick Skylark with the top down. We're driving down Santa Monica, but what's wrong with this picture? In the middle of Santa Monica Boulevard, there's a railroad track. There's 2 lanes over here and 2 lanes, there's 1 or 2 lanes. And here's Doug Weston's Troubadour, and I'm going, and Peter's driving the car, and all of a sudden Peter's driving the car, and all of a sudden I look up and I see Doug Weston's sign, and I go, "Peter, we're on the wrong side of the road."
God.
Did. Oh. We jumped seats. We stopped the car right in the middle of Santa Monica, and we jumped seats, and I got over, around, and back to the house. And I went, "Holy mackerel." Well, then, anyway, that was a sobering awakening. But anyway, so the band started, and then J.C. Crowley, who was unfortunately living out of his car, Patty and I brought him in-house. The band reformed. We went around, auditioned more. Lambert and Potter, who formed Haven Records, and an attorney by the name of Bruce Graykel, God bless his heart, he really helped us out a lot. Helped them get resolved from the GTO deal. The band's name was Riff Raff. We had to change the name because there was a group on RCA in England called Riff Raff. Changed it to Bandana. Then while we were signed, we did a singles deal with Haven Records, and the name was Bandana. As a matter of fact, I got a 45 jukebox Saturday night on the Bandana, on the Haven label, under the name Bandana. And then we get a call from Led Zeppelin's management company, and they say, I forget their manager. He was just
Peter Grant.
Peter Grant.
Yeah.
He ate nails for breakfast.
He was a big, scary guy.
And scary. We could hear his voice all across the room when he was talking to Brian Potter. "You get the effing name off that effing label, or I'm gonna effing sue you for every goddamn thing you got." So we were going, "Holy mackerel!" So I guess we better remove our name from that. So Bandana's gone. At that time, we did 6 songs, 5 of which I wrote with Player.
Okay.
Co-wrote with Kipner, and Crowley was a co-writer, and so I think of 4 or 5 of the songs on the album. I left. Peter and I got in a tiz. That wasn't working out, and I think he wanted to work more with Crowley. I ended up getting a call from Patty. We were now separated. She says they're looking for a guy to play Paul McCartney. What's to be a Broadway show called Beatlemania. I'm going out of town. I auditioned in LA, got the gig immediately. I went to New York, did Beatlemania, and while I was there, all of a sudden, RSO had bought from Lambert and Potter. They dissolved their label. They couldn't afford to keep it going. And RSO, Robert Stigman organization, picked it up. I'm in New York doing Beatlemania, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at Billboard and boom, Baby Come Back went right to the top. Now people today, there's a couple of disc jockeys along the way, they kind of don't believe, because first, I can't even play Baby Come Back, because Baby Come Back, when it initially started out, was more of an acoustic thing.
Okay.
Crowley and Beckett completed, well, they did the song. It was more of a Hall & Oates kind of feel, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I can't take any credit for it. I got the flip side of the 45, which was nice. Love is where you find it. But yeah, it's just amazing how these things evolve. Then I came back to finish Beatlemania at the Pantages.
Well, let's talk about Beatlemania. I mean, tribute acts are all the rage these days. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a tribute act these days. But Beatlemania was the first.
Oh, yeah.
And it was unheard of, really. These guys are playing the Beatles?
And it was supposed to be just a club act. And out of Texas. And I believe then Jules Fisher got a hold of it, and then one thing led to another.
I assume that you had your Paul McCartney chops honed by that point. Yeah. So.
Well, they gave me a list of 50 plus songs at the audition. Sandy Aguda, who was one of the background singers for Jay and the Americans.
Okay.
He was made musical director by Steve Lieber, who was one of the producers, Lieber and Krebs,
right,
who had Aerosmith.
Yes, they did.
Okay. He comes up to me, and I had nothing to lose. Players gone, or what turned to be players. I don't know, what am I going to do? So I walk in, and there's all these Beatle lookalikes and everything like that. Well, Sandy comes up to me, he's got that New York, chewing the gum, a real cocky New York guy, And he says, okay, kid, I suppose you're here to, because I did have a younger look, I suppose you're here, you're not here for the Ringo part. And I said, no, I'll do the McCartney part. And he hands me this list, and he says to me, pick 3 songs out of this list, and then he says, or do you know any of these songs? And so I get the New York attitude kind of rubbed off. So I said, I tell you what, pal, I'll give you $1 for every song I don't know. And he said, up there.
Yeah.
So I go up there, and what did I do? None of the songs on the list. I did Maybe I'm Amazed, and nailed it.
Okay.
All I remember seeing is the corner of my eye. I'm not being ego about this, but it was just, I have to laugh now because out of the corner of my eye, in Studio Instrument Rentals, they had these seats and everything. You saw and there was about 30-some people in the room auditioning. You saw about 10 guys get up and walk out. And after I got done, I did Long and Winding Road. And Sandy says to me, he says, you really know how to clear a room.
Right. Oh, man.
But in a good way, because those were 10 that he didn't have to audition.
That's so cool.
And then I went and met with him at the Continental Riot House or Hyatt the next day on the roof by the pool. And he said, kid, you're going to go to New York. Do you want to go? I got a one-way ticket. And I said, okay, I'll check it out. So I went there. And it was a huge hit.
Yeah, how long were you in Beatlemania?
It all went so fast. I would say, oh God, we started in 77. I would say I was with them for a year. Okay. And then I just got beatled out. When we hit the Pantages, plus now I'm back in my home turf. And I started, looking at other options. I had, Beatlemania was not a career maker. In other words, it was not a career enhancement, I should say. Okay. But it was, people were amazed. It's just afterwards, all these bands start showing up. Right. And oh my God, it was like they're coming out of the woodwork.
Right,
right. And I didn't sing a Beatles song for quite a while. I really didn't. I love the Beatles, but no.
Now, I understand, however, you did have a chance to play with one of the Beatles at one time. Can you tell us about that?
No, that was at the record plant. It was Jim Keltner, who was a very famous studio drummer in L.A. He would have Jim Keltner's fan club every Monday night at the record plant. And people would show up, and well, in this particular instance, I got a phone call from a guy that I knew out of Chicago, the city of Chicago, years prior when I was in the Hardy Boys, and he was out. His name was Bobby Jones, and he was looking for gigs, and he calls me up and he says, "Hey, there's this really cool thing going on at the record plant tonight. Do you want to go?" Well, as long story short, it turned out to be John Lennon's session, and I walk in, and all of a sudden I see. John Lennon came walking behind me. There was all these people wanting to get in, but it was like at Studio 54 where,
The velvet rope?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I've been to Studio 54, and they, unless you don't look like you know what you're doing, you're never going to get in that place. So I would get in, though, but it was like, in this particular instance, Donnie Dacus was with me. And Donnie played Chicago, and he played with Steve Stills, and Donnie and I were good old buddies so we got in, and I knew Gary Malaber, who was the second drummer. Gary was out of Boston. And I met him, so he was kind of instrumental in getting us in there. So they had 5 guitar players. Now there's Jack Bruce on bass. Wow. Whoa! And then I'm looking around the room and I'm going, this is cool. And then, but what Lennon was doing with this group of musicians, he was recording the songs which happened to be got up on the wall. John Lennon, he did, oh God, Do You Want to Dance? I played on Do You Want to Dance. Okay. Well, Jack Bruce was playing on it. What they did, Mike, is they looped the 16-track machine, and what they did is did one big edit of the song. So I don't know if Jack Bruce's bass lines are on there, or because Jack Bruce got fed up with the whole thing, put the bass down, got up and walked out because he was recording down the hallway in another studio. And I picked up the bass, and I picked up where he left off. Jagger was there. Wow. He was singing background. And then Harry Nilsson came in. He was a little out of... He was doing the Pussycats album with Lennon.
Okay. This was during John's notorious partying phase. Him and Harry Nilsson.
That picture right there, right behind you.
Oh, yeah.
A friend of mine took that picture. That's at Lou Adler's house, 8 o'clock in the morning. It was that night that Lennon got dumped out of the Troubadour.
Okay.
But he would not talk to Tom Zimberoff, the photographer. So Tom said he found a puppet. And he picked up the puppet and said, okay, I have the puppet talk for you. So Lennon started talking.
Surreal.
But it was that night that he got thrown out of the Troubadour.
Okay.
But yeah, that's when he was going through that tumultuous time. It's like or Harry Nilsson would say, when he was no angel, but he would say, John was great. Or Elliot Mintz, he was his publicist. He said, John was great. The first Brandy and Sour, John was in love with you. Second Brandy and Sour, he thought maybe you were his ex-wife. Third Brandy and Sour, it was a fight. Yes. But the guy was the nicest guy in the world. Sure. And and then at the end of the night, everybody dispersed, and I was just there. Donnie was wanting to go home. It was about 5 in the morning. The sun was up, and John Lennon comes out. And I don't know where he's in the back somewhere. With Nielsen passed out, went home. Everybody was gone, and it was like surreal because the room was gray because the door was open. Or it was gray light, and all of a sudden I was jamming on the guitar, and he picked up the guitar. He goes, "Oh, Mike, I can't do his voice, but do you want to jam?" So we're doing this thing. I still know it to this day. Down, down, and he loved it. And he was, "Oh, teach me that. How does it go? Down, down." In the back, all of a sudden I hear Donnie's got a southern accent. Damn it, Reed, I gotta go home, man. I had enough of this music crap. And I go, Donnie,
I'm playing with John Lennon. God.
And I just went, holy mackerel.
I want to go home.
And I had my little gray Porsche outside, and I got him, and I didn't say one word to him all the way up, because he just started making, and then Lennon just got paranoid. He got up and walked out of the room.
Yeah.
He said, who's your nut friend?
Wait, so tell me about your involvement with Badfinger.
How that came about, I was working, backtrack just 1 second, I was working with Don Johnson from Miami.
Really? Okay.
We'd written a lot of songs together, so I was pretty much concentrating on that. And all of a sudden one day I get a phone call from a guy who was managing or booking Badfinger. And they didn't have a slide guitar player, and he knew about my vocal capabilities.
Okay.
Badfinger were located, they were held up in Milwaukee. They were really having some problems, management-wise, and it was very dysfunctional, to say the least. And Mike Gibbons, Bob Jackson, and Tommy Evans were living in Milwaukee. And this guy, Bob Mango, calls me up and he goes, Reed, are you doing anything these days? Because I'd like to bring you into Badfinger. And I said, oh, Badfinger. I said, I love Badfinger. He said, did you play good slide guitar? And I said, oh, negatory, I don't play slide at all. So he said, oh, that's too bad. He said, do you know anybody that does? And I said, yeah, Donnie Dacus, who played with Chicago. And Donnie is a great slide player. And so as it turns out, I contacted Donnie, we flew him in. They had a tour set up. And I met with Tommy, really liked him immediately. Tommy's just a great guy. So as it turns out, we rehearsed, I think, 3 or 4 days, and then we went out and played Minneapolis, our first date. But what I loved about Badfinger is that, oh man, there were some nights, it was the ultimate garage band, which is that's my roots. The old getting together and pounding out in the garage,
Yeah.
And that was Badfinger. But we'd get there, and all of a sudden we noticed that we were supposed to do an hour and a half set, and we were an hour and 20, so we needed 10 minutes. So I turn around and say, everybody, Long Tall Sally in the key of G.
Oh, nice.
Which is what McCartney used to say. And
Right.
Tommy, I'll never get Tommy's look in his face. He goes, key of what? Effing what? I said, key of G. And Donnie knew it. And I said, ready? I'm on a talent. Boom! We did it. We stretched that out for 10 minutes. Talk to the audience in the and then we do Money, or I did I'm Down by the Beatles. You tell us. That's what I loved about the band, though. You never knew what you were going to get yourself into. But what was interesting about touring, which I'll never do, today they got these buses that are like, I heard a rumor that one of these country stars has a swimming pool in one of them. They're just, a full bar.
Right.
And, but we had one night that was pretty devastating, that we were driving down, I can never sleep on the damn thing, and there's a guy by the name of Ray Ranieri, who was Judy Garland's road manager I told you about earlier, and he was taking over the tour. It was pretty aimless. Things were not management-wise coherent, but once we got to the stage, everything was great. All of a sudden, Ray and I are talking. It was about 2 in the morning, and I just couldn't sleep. And he's constantly looking out the rearview mirror. And I said, Ray, what's wrong? He says, we're pulling into the it was like a stop and go, And this was going on for about 10, 15 minutes. And finally, or with me anyway. And so finally what happens is we go into stop and go, he goes to a payphone. Believe it or not, there were payphones at one time. And he came back and he said he locked up the RV. And he said nobody, and everybody was up now. Why the hell are we stopping? It's 2 o'clock in the effing morning, And all of a sudden we see a highway patrol car come in, and the lights are on. And oh, great. And first thing I said, typical, you talk about paranoia, I said, anybody holding?
Right. It is a rock and roll band.
And as it turns out, then Ray goes out. What had happened was, we had guys on the road. We'd play like Bloomington, Illinois, and then we'd go to such and such, Indiana. And you notice in the audience, there were the same people out in the audience. And you're going, what in the hell is this? And so I said to Tommy, and they'd be holding Badfinger albums. And I said, Tommy, what are those? He said, they're fans. This happens to us all the time. It's kind of like, who's the group that the Fingerhead? Yeah, Deadheads. Yeah. And so, as it turned out, and they'd follow us from city to city. And so, what happened was there was a guy that they picked up. He was trailing us for miles, apparently. They were aware of it. The State Patrol were aware of it. This guy was wanted for murder. Oh, no. Finding out that he was at one of the gigs and just didn't like those, bastards, as he put it to the police, and they caught him. And Ray noticed that this car was changing lanes with him.
Oh, my God.
And so Ray was a very savvy guy.
Now, again, getting back to rock and roll history, you had an encounter with the late, great Jim Croce.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, Jim was on our label on ABC Dunhill. And
this was going back to the Grassroots early 70s.
We flew into this little airport, and before too long, Jim Croce showed up. And Jim was a great guy. He was loved by everybody at the label. Cashman and West produced him. Don't mess around with,
Just breaking as a huge star. I mean, he had a few hits.
He was a truck driver.
Yeah.
He was a truck driver, and he had this great personality. I remember seeing him at the Troubadour, and he won me over in 5 minutes. He was just that good. And he had a great voice, great sense of humor on stage, and he had some hits going. And he got into the airport. The airport was the size of a 2-car garage.
Okay.
Not big at all. Tiny little strip. Typical of like up north and down south, you have the pine trees surrounding the airport. I think for up north in Wisconsin, they do it because of snow drifting and whatnot. Right. But anyway, they have these smaller airports. And there's a reason I'm bringing that up, because what happened was, it was hot. It was just ugly. And they wanted the plane, we wanted the plane, and there was a matter of 80 miles in both different directions. And we had an agent with us that normally traveled with Jim, and there was an agent with Jim that normally traveled with us. So they switched. Talk about the finger of fate.
Yeah.
They switched. Now, God, strike me now. I'm not making this up. It's just that in my brain. And as it turned out, they couldn't get together on who was going to get the plane with him. And Grill and Croce were kind of bantering back and forth. And Grill says, we got more hits than you do. And he says, yeah, but I got a big record now in the charts. What do you got?
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of sense of humor was going back and forth. And finally it came down to, as I remember, Richard Grody, who was a road manager of ours, he had fake flight right here. These teeth came out. And when anything ever went wrong, what he would do is drop it. He wouldn't say, we missed the flight, we're not getting that flight. And he dropped it. And I remember distinctly, and I was wearing that jacket that day, I remember throwing a quarter and I said, flip a coin, for Christ's sake. Grody went into a little office with this guy, came out, dropped his plate. We lost the flip. He got the plane. It was that I thought it was that day that his plane went down. It was actually the next night.
Okay.
They were leaving the airport, and next thing was they went 20 feet up and right into the trees, and that was it.
Oh man.
What's kind of spooky to me, and I think I talked to somebody about it who's in a psychoanalyst world. Sometimes when bad things happen that you're witness to, or it happens to you, your mind blanks it out. You don't want to. Unfortunately, what happens to me is that I remember everything. I might have a couple of details wrong, but the generic or the generic parts of the whole thing is I got it, and that's why. Like you were commenting earlier in the house about the old photographs. I like that. It keeps the memory
preservation
fresh.
of history.
Yeah.
So when you look back on your career in music, this is a tough question. Is there a highlight? Is there a moment that stands out where you go, "Wow, that was really cool"?
Well, that's a real toughie because, as I said, there were so many. It was so eclectic that there were so many different things. That it was like every time you discovered a new thing, Hardy Boys, Grassroots, Player, Beatlemania, working with the DJ, Don Johnson, all these different things. It was, oh, wow, that's cool at the moment. And then, I guess I get bored easily. I mean, it's like, I remember I talked to Jackson Browne at a fundraiser up at the Harold Lloyd Estate, as a matter of fact. It was for Jacques Cousteau. And I said, how can you sing? They're wonderful songs, but I can't remember the titles of the song. The Loner.
Running on Empty.
Running on Empty. Every night. And he loves the road. But to answer your question, it's a real tough one. I think the real magic for me, though, was when I was a kid watching. I remember having this. People think I'm nuts now. You're going to be sorry you're doing this interview. But I remember when I was doing the Rick Nelson show at that time in 4th grade, we made $17.35 with the neighborhood kids. He was on a show with us. He was my idol. He was on a show with the Grassroots. They wanted to open up so they could leave and go home early. We wanted to open up so we could leave. It was a bad gig. There was nobody there.
Yeah, apparently.
So we wanted to go home. So anyway, we ended up losing that flip. We ended up on stage playing. And I remember he was sitting, before we went on, he was tuning up in this little room, sitting on a folding chair. And I looked inside and I could see this guy. It was just like so peaceful and so alone. Very lonely guy. And he was a very, very shy individual. And I didn't go up and say hi to him. And then I'm on stage playing Temptation Eyes.
Okay.
I'll learn because I do an extended solo on it. And a Grassroots song. And I'm doing that, and all of a sudden I look over to the side of the stage, and standing in the wings is, and he goes,
"Oh,
Rick Nelson." And I went, "Yeah." No, those are highlights.
That's cool.
Got a long way to go. Yes, I know.